I've got a fun one today. Today we're going to do collage, but there's no scissors involved. There's no cutting involved whatsoever. It's just paper, paint, a jelly plate, and a brayer. And some masks and patterns if you want them. Come on with me, let's have some fun. Last week I spent some time going over jelly plate basics for making collage paper. Today I'm going to make collages on the jelly plate with no cutting involved. This is one of my favorite things to do on a jelly plate. It is more fun than you'd expect, and it leads to some of the most fun, interesting, accidental discoveries. So the jelly plate's prepared the exact same way as it would be if you're doing collage paper, but instead of laying paper across the entire plate to get as much as possible on the plate or on the page, in this case I'm adding several pieces of paper to get part of the print on part of the paper. It'll make sense in a second. So every part of the jelly plate was covered, but by different pieces of paper. You can be as specific as you want about this. You could just put 4 pieces on and arrange them so each one gets a quarter of the pattern. I tend to do things randomly, shocker. I just like to see what I get. And as I mentioned before, right, I use this fluorescent red, but there's still the history that's already on the plate that I enjoy. So I don't clean my plate exceptionally well, ever, but also in between prints. So this ghost print then of the yarn on the plate. I know that upper right hand corner doesn't look like anything, but I figured I would just try it. That's my motto when it comes to, it really didn't do anything. And most of these didn't do anything because the paint had dried. My fluorescent red, I have not mixed it with any open medium, although that is a great idea for me to do that, because then I could have a lot more fun with the jelly plate in that specific color. This is a very light purple. It's hard to see. It's a Titan violet pale, I believe. And back to my tiny little rubber bands. So the randomness, well, in how I do it, it's very random. I'm just trying to look for different combinations of objects for masks, so different sizes, tiny little rubber bands, big long piece of yarn, etc., to mix and match into a kind of patchwork collage on these papers. Because I don't know specifically where things are going to end up, because I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it for the most part, it really is a discovery process. You'll see that sometimes I try to make sure that areas overlap the last, I don't know, I'll call it collage scrap, but it's really just part of the piece of paper. I try to make them overlap a little bit. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes it works better than others. Again, you can see that this paint, much of it already dried before I got to it. It is always interesting, rarely disappointing, and for me, a ton of fun. It's just, I think it's the randomness. You can't, what are you going to make a wrong decision? Come on. Worst case scenario, you make something that's a patchwork of designs. You don't like most of it, so you cut out the part that you do like, and there's your collage paper, just a smaller piece. Literally the most fun. There's so little risk if you're open to imperfection. If you're not open to imperfection, I would not recommend a jelly plate. I would not recommend mixed media art. I would recommend maybe some cross stitch or like needlepoint or knitting. I don't know. Those things seem very exact and mathematical. This is just, let's throw it all at the wall and see what happens. That's the way I like to do it anyway. So I'm adding more of the fluorescent red. I initially thought I'll just use 4 pages and make this collage, and I quickly realized that I couldn't vary the shapes and sizes that I was pulling on each piece of paper if I only used 4 pages. They would have all been, iterations of the same size and shape. This has that violet in it as well, but because, again, this is also a quick drying paint, it came out kind of scattered. It looks kind of like rough cement to me. And you can, like anything else with paint, if you don't like a part of it, you can paint over it. You can use a Gelli plate to paint over it. By printing, you can take out a brush and paint over it. If you haven't gotten the message yet, I really like things where you can't do it wrong. There's so few ways, if you're using paint and a brayer, there's so few ways to do this wrong that, is there a way to do it wrong? I really don't know. I can't figure out one. When in doubt, add black. Because I used some lighter colors and that Titan pale violet was still a prominent feature on here, I thought I would use black to, one, get a darker value on the collage pieces. I don't know what to call this. I'm calling it a collage. If anyone has any better names for it, for what I'm making on these, single pieces of paper, let me know. To me, it just looks like a collage that you make all on the same piece of paper instead of cutting other pieces up from other papers and gluing them together. It's the same effect, except no scissors required. So it's like a shorthand and much more random because you're building it upside down. I can't see exactly where I'm putting these papers. So if you are trying to recover from perfectionism and get away from being exact, try this. It might drive you crazy at first, but it's a great exercise to remember that creativity never has to be exact. And sometimes when you don't know what you're doing, it's the most fun. And you can kind of trick yourself into thinking, I don't know, it's sometimes when I'm painting, if I make a deliberate mark, like I say, I'm going to draw a leaf shape here. For me, it sticks out like a sore thumb, and I don't like it because everything else is kind of abstracted and feels organic. And then I have this one place where I drew a leaf shape. That's one thing that Gelli printing helps with. You can use stencils, sure, they're very deliberate, but that's fine. But if you're just trying to find organic ways of collecting these prints, this is a great way to do it because you can't really, it's hard to overplan things when you're putting paper upside down. Now, people who do lots of Gelli printing and they do it as a form of art, that's what I'm doing. But I guess what I mean is if they're using something where they're doing photo transfers or making something exact and they want to color in the right areas, you can take your Gelli plate and put your Gelli plate upside down on the paper, which gives you a lot better insight into where you're putting the plate to match up with whatever you're working on. That is fair. That's not what I'm doing here. This is an exercise in the unseen, playing with what's available, taking some chances, covering my eyes, please jumping in anyway. There definitely are moments that I've stopped and I've taken my hairdryer to the Gelli plate, especially when I have golden open paints I'm using and I want to add another color on top. I will typically take my hairdryer and I will dry that so I don't have to worry about the colors blending on the Gelli plate. So I've edited that out just because, do you really want to watch me blow dry something? Maybe you do. Sorry about that for those people. I figured it was more fun to watch this part. But there are some times I did stop to dry it. You can also do that if you got a print where part of the paint was dry, part of it's still wet, and you want to keep that ghost print or keep whatever it is, but it's already dried at least part of the way. Go ahead and dry it the rest of the way with a hairdryer, then add a new color and then pull the print. And these are not rules, these are all guidelines. I assume you know that. This is just what I happen to like doing and what's worked well for me. I think there are just as many ways to pull prints on a Gelli plate, and what you can create on this as people in the world. Everyone's got their own style, everyone's got their own way of using it, and it's just a lot of fun. I don't remember when it was, a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I did a video where I started with my small Gelli plate. It's a 5x7 Gelli plate, and I started that and I made some landscapes, some abstract landscapes, which came out pretty cool. I will link to that so that you can see it if you're interested. You'll notice that this quinacridone gold that I put down, the pattern that I tried to pull through with my catalyst wedge didn't do a whole lot, but I'm still pulling up the paper, and you can just see subtle horizontal lines in the pull on the left. It just adds a little something, and everything can't be a huge major pattern, or it's going to be so hard to look at. So even though I'm making these, no-cut collages completely from Gelli printed pages and sections, I'm still adding some quieter spaces. I'm still going to cover some things up, because from a composition, even though I'm not fully focused on compositions on these collages, I do want variety. And for me, having differences in whatever you make is more important than what shapes the things are in. Shape does matter. Composition absolutely matters. I guess I address composition in terms of variety and variation. If everything's the same, it's not going to be a great composition for me. If everything is loud and crazy, it's also not going to be a great composition and maybe not be an successful piece of art. If I want to make some things a little crazy, you can make everything crazy. Sometimes I totally make everything crazy. And to be honest, these kind of turn out all pretty bold, and some may call a little crazy. But even still, everything can't be the most exciting piece. So I'm still mindful of finding differences. And part of the differences are having some places be loud, like my fluorescent red. It's very loud. And have some places be more quiet. Like Celadon green is a great color for quieting things down. It's my favorite neutral. I used to be 100% rainbow all the time. On the inside, I still am. Always on the inside, I'm rainbow colors. But see how nice it looks over that fluorescent red too? Oh, it's so satisfying. Because it allows that fluorescent red to really pop. And it allows whatever else is underneath it to show through so nicely. And I'm so biased. I love this color. I love Celadon. I'm not even sure where it came from in my mind. I honestly, before the last few years, I hadn't even thought of the name of that color since pottery class, my junior year of high school. It was my favorite glaze. So it is just hibernating back in my subconscious until now, when I'm like, oh, right, I remember that name. All right, let's see if I like that color. Yep, I still like that color. Okay. So a lot of these pages right now are kind of scrap pages because I I had things, this is a golden open color, so everything was still kind of wet and I couldn't keep putting those pages down. So I just brought in some new scrap paper and I'm adding to my no-cut collage dynasty here. I didn't have a great place for this ghost print, so I added it to a poll that I did from the earlier collage video to give that some interest. Right here, I was thinking about what else would go well on these sheets. I decided that I wanted to have some blues. And I decided I wanted to do 2 blues. So it's Payne's Gray on the bottom and whatever mix I did earlier of like phthalo turquoise, white, I think some celadon. I can't remember what else I put into that top blue. And I made this gradient, adding some more yarn. But every time I add something, even if it's a repeat of the item, so I did yarn earlier, this now will be on a different layer of the collage. And because it's a gradient and my yarn is twisting in different ways, it will still be a difference. You don't have to reinvent everything every time. Right? You going to a fancy dinner, you can wear the dress you wore last Christmas or last, Thanksgiving. You can wear that again. And if you're worried about people thinking you wear the same clothes all the time, then wear a scarf with it. I don't know. This is terrible. I should never be giving anyone fashion advice since I pretty much live in yoga pants. So please excuse me. I promise to stick to art-related metaphors instead of fashion consulting. From this point on, I'm just looking for filling the white spaces that are left. As I'm going, the spaces are getting narrower and less obvious places to put the paper on the Gelli plate in order to fill those spaces. So I'm definitely being more thoughtful. You can see I'm using way more papers at once, trying to fill smaller spaces, overlap things. I'm trying to vary the shapes that I'm printing so that it's not only rectangles and it's not rectangles of the same size. There are some exceptions. I really love that one. And I really love how this blue gradient looks. I feel like it adds so much to these collages. We need a new name for this. Is it a no-cut collage? Is that a good name for it? I feel like it's kind of descriptive, but I feel like there must be a better name for what these are called. So hit me with your best ideas in the comments because I feel like we can make this great. And I love how that poll turned out too. More tissue paper. Gotta keep layering all the time. I'm using blank sheets here mostly just to pull the extra blue off of that so that I can get a clean ghost print once it's off. Just adding the smallest bits of blue here. Taking off the yarn is always so pleasing. Whoops, as I hit the camera. Now that I have a lot of medium values, a couple dark values, I wanted to go back in with some white. Again, I'm thinking about quieter spaces. I'm thinking values. And I'm thinking shapes. That's really all it comes down to. That might sound overly simplistic, but when you get down to it, all of art is made up of these simple building blocks, and we all interpret them differently, and that's why we have different artistic styles. You may like lots and lots and lots of light values, and so it's really soft. Your art is very soft and very light. Someone else might like all dark values with a teeny little bit of medium value in there. Totally acceptable. Nothing wrong with any of these choices. It's just that we have different preferences, and the more preferences we have and the different arrangements and variables we use defines our artistic style. I chickened out on this one. I decided I didn't want any of these white marks, so I switched over to tissue paper. The good news is, since there's no rules, I can't do it wrong. Cleaning up all the negative spaces there. Looking for my ghost print. I like having the crisp edges when I do use these paper masks. It's definitely different than the blurred edges of the yarn or just the ruggedness of the pulls when they leave all the history and texture behind. Having the crisp rubber band outlines, paper mask outlines, even the ghost prints of the rubber bands are not as crisp as the masks themselves, the initial pull. And when this white goes over lighter areas, it'll create a more subtle effect. When the white goes over darker areas, it will create a more obvious effect. And every time, it will add depth to whatever you're working on. Every layer, every mark, everything adds more depth. Even if you're putting opaque paint over transparent paint, which will block out all the transparent paint, in theory. If you have a mask or anything else that lets some of the other color through, you're still adding depth, even though you're flattening that top layer, because you won't be able to see most of what's behind it. But you will still see that there's something behind it. All right, back on my rubber bands, my tiny little friends. Even though I've already had some of this pattern in these collages, I'm going to repeat it again, because some of the other layer got covered up. The other layer was with a light violet, and this will have the opposite effect, because this will be very obvious if I put it on lighter areas. It will be a nice dark value. And Payne's Gray is transparent. It's dark, but it's a transparent color. So you'll be able to see the history even in the darker areas. The reason that the gradient wasn't as transparent is because I mixed it with the Celadon. Oh no, I mixed it with the light blue. Excuse me. And now that these are almost done, you can probably notice I'm getting very particular about where I'm printing versus the beginning when it was just, up for grabs. These are getting close to being done, so I'm focusing on the edits. Where to add a little, where to add a lot, based on what's working and not working. So my choice of using open paints here is very deliberate, because if this was not open paint, most of these prints would not come out because the paint would have already been dry. One more reason I love open paint. You can tell I'm trying to get just little bits here. And I do have some pages that I'm just using to kind of offload the paint to get it off the Gelli plate. And then some of those over the course of this have turned into their own collages. See, like that one. And just these little bits, you can see how it blocks out more of the color, more of the existing patterns, adds a darker value, and highlights the colors underneath it. It's just fun, guys. I can't recommend this enough. If you like making Gelli plate collage paper, I think you'll really get a kick out of this. You may already do this already, but it's so much fun to mix and match and see what you come up with. And again, I am accepting names. If this has a name, let me know what it is. Otherwise, let's figure out a name for it. I do kind of like the no-cut collage because it's very self-explanatory, but maybe we can find something even better.